CSWA Bixby, and I'm interviewing Maurice Schwarz. Are you an alumni of USC?
Am I what? Alumni of SC? No.
Okay. You're an alumni of what?
Southwestern University.
This subject will be on Maurice's volunteer efforts in the field of social work in the area of Los Angeles. The date is July 11th, 1989. Okay, let's stop this and see. Maurice, have you been subject of any of these interviews of this type before?
No.
Okay. What circumstances led you to do volunteer work in the field of social work?
Very clearly remember that it was becoming a big brother to a little boy who lost his father shortly after he was born. I became his big brother and worked with him for many years until after his 18th birthday, he was no longer a statistic in the agency. But following that, we remained friends, and we still are good friends. Following that experience, I had a second little brother. And as a result of the work that was done as a big brother, and I could see the benefit to a youngster of a role model, I felt it was a very wonderful movement. And the organization with which I was affiliated that provided me with the little brother was the Jewish Big Brothers of Los Angeles. I eventually became a member of their board and president. And then at a subsequent time, I was invited to join the board of Big Brothers of America, which was formed in the middle 40s, I believe, and stayed on that board for many years. Became president in 1974 when we merged Big Brothers of America with Big Sisters International and became one organization serving both boys and girls, a national organization, sort of an umbrella organization that presently has 480 some odd member agencies throughout the United States and some parts of the world. I was also helpful in founding the Big Brothers of Greater Los Angeles, and I'm presently on the board of Big Sisters of Los Angeles. But it all started with becoming a big brother and knowing how beneficial that could be to a boy and to his family.
You also have done a lot of work over the years, too, with United Way.
Yes. Somewhat inspired by my wife, who was a social worker. I became active in the United Way, served on the Agency Relations Committee some years ago, was on the Welfare Planning Council, and on the Mental Health Development Commission when it was a part of the United Way. And in more recent years, I've served on the Budget Review Committees of the United Way.
How do you feel about the Mental Health Commission, which I also served on, and what's resulted from that movement in the state and so on mental health?
Well, I think the work that one does with United Way is terribly important, and the goal of United Way are very laudable and very worthwhile, and federated giving is the only answer to the fundraising in Los Angeles, and should be enforced, should be much more used than it is. But I do think the personal satisfactions that one gets out of doing volunteer work are much greater when you're working directly with either children or in a health agency or in some direct contact with the beneficiaries of the agency's program that you're affiliated with.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Well, one of the things I wanted to find out from you, though, was as a result of the Mental Health Commission, the mental patients were released to their local communities for care. And you see what's happened there. Do you feel that the whole Commission's work at that period was wrongly directed?
No, I think it was the right direction for the time we were in, but it was an evolving or emerging type of a program. And I think at that point in time, mental health wasn't recognized as clearly as it is today as the kind of a problem that it is. And as far as the efforts are concerned, between the Mental Health Commission and later the Mental Health Board and the actual service area, there's a wide gap.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the things that I've had a guilty conscience about ever since was whether we released all these people, but we released them without any guarantee of care in their local communities, and that has kind of been a sad commentary.
Well, for some reason, mental health doesn't seem to get the public support that other types of agencies, programs do. Perhaps it's the fact that there's a background of people with mental health problems being sort of shoved into institutions or kept in the dark. And it's unfortunate, and I think in recent years it's come out in the open quite a bit. But because of the lack of public support, it's been up to the state or the cities to fund mental health efforts, and the competition for the dollars is so great, and so many other causes are so much more better organized and have a much greater appeal to the public, that it puts mental health at a great disadvantage. It's terribly important, but it's fighting against things that have a greater popular appeal.
You were on the Welfare Planning Council. How did you feel about its demise?
Sad.
Okay.
I felt very badly about it. I thought the Welfare Planning Council was a very strategic and a very useful and important adjunct to the whole process of federated giving, and I felt badly that it sort of phased out of existence.
The research that the Planning Council did in those days is so much different than the so-called research being done now in the planning division of United Way. The Planning Council days involved a lot of the agencies in a more structured way. Don't you agree?
I do agree with that. I think the agencies participated to a great degree, and I think their participation was very helpful in the results. Because in a sense, they were guiding the volunteers on the council, but it was more of a partnership arrangement, and together they worked up some very good solutions.
That's some of the real satisfactions I have in remembering were the days on the Planning Council.
Right.
Were you involved with the negotiations that went on to merge it into United Way?
No. Not that I recall. In a way, I thought the Planning Council was almost an outgrowth or a successor to an early organization called the California Health and Welfare Association.
Oh, yeah, that was a statewide thing.
Right.
Yeah, did you belong to that? Or
yes, that was one of my first volunteer organizations.
Okay, that's interesting because I'd like to talk about that a little bit. That also suffered a demise at my hands.
At your hands?
Yeah, I was its last president.
Tell me about that, Jay.
I will it, but not on this tape. Anyway, that organization had a very good history too, but organizations like that have kind of gone down the tube in recent years. How would you explain why that happened?
Well, I really wasn't aware that there were that many.
Well, there was a national one, and then there were state ones too, all over.
I can only guess on that one, Kay, and my guess would be that probably a great deal of what they thought was to be their program was done by other groups.
Could be. It was a sad commentary. Were you involved with the yearly conferences they had?
Yes, I think I went to 2 of them.
You were the treasurer.
That was what?
The treasurer.
I thought I was vice president or something else. Maybe president, I'm not sure which. I remember going to the one conference in San Diego.
Well, and you see, now in today's world, they have nothing to replace that sort of thing.
That's right.
It isn't there anymore.
But is there a need for that sort of thing?
Well, that's the whole thing. I don't know.
I think to a great extent the United Way perhaps does much. Either United Ways of America or the individual United Ways in larger communities probably supplement or probably do a great deal of what the early California Association did.
Well, I would say that United Way still cannot involve the public sector and the non-United Way agencies.
That's true, they don't.
They just can't do it. And where the old California Welfare Association did.
That's right.
So that, it's a very different thing. Of all of the activities in which you've been involved, where do you feel that the greatest changes in the field have occurred?
Well, the ones I'm most familiar with, of course, are in the standards and practices of Big Brother and Big Sister work. And there's been great changes in that. First of all, in the early days, it was almost, in the very early days that I was involved, it wasn't necessary to be a social worker almost, to staff a Big Brother agency. Gradually, as the programs expanded to include the problems of boys and their families, it became more desirable to have social workers and then those with master's degrees. And today, almost all of the larger agencies require social workers with masters. I think a second very great change was that in the early days of the Big Brother movement, all of the staff, all of the boards were entirely male. And it was shocking to think that they'd have a lady social worker for a little brother. But today we have a very, very large, if not a preponderant number of social workers in different agencies that are women. I think the other change is the professionalism that's grown into the work. It becomes very, very professional in the way boys and their families are interviewed and counseled and worked with, in addition or supplementary to their becoming a little brother. And in some cases where it's not appropriate, where the boy is particularly handicapped, emotionally or mentally, a Big Brother is never assigned in the way. And the casework continues to be the answer to helping that youngster and his family. Of course, the institutionalization has been of great change. It's no longer acceptable to have these large institutions for children, and small acute treatment centers have replaced the big ones, the impersonal ones. And I think there's a much greater knowledge today about the way one should handle children of all ages, particularly of the very younger children, but before they reach the Big Brother stage, or little brother stage, or little sister stage. But as the work in Marge's Julianne Singer agency is with preschool, with children of preschool age who have emotional problems. I think this is a big step forward.
Did you
I think
feel
the use
any...
of volunteers has become more skillful also.
Well, that's what I was wondering too. You see, did you feel at any period of time that the volunteer role was being pushed out in favor of the professional?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. And I think in some agencies it's very paramount.
Okay. That was one of the changes I think that was profound in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's still going on.
And only the volunteers can change that.
That's right.
Yeah. You were on the
But
national
they're not
board.
as well organized as professionals.
Well, maybe they'll get there. You were on the national board of volunteer
Right.
when it went through its various name changes and so on. How long were you on that board,
I
Maurice?
think I was on 7 or 8 years. I went on at a
Hello? Okay.
just before it merged with that other organization. Marge, what was the name of the other organization that Volunteer merged with? I served on the merger committee with Mary Ripley. It had an acronym for a name.
Not the vax.
No. I think it was from the probably the middle or late 70s to, it was about 1970, 78 or 79 until 1986 or 87 that I was on that board. Served on 2 merger committees with them where they absorbed another organization. What was your question?
Well, what changes did you see in that structure and what its goals and so on became after you'd served on there a while?
Well, their primary goal was to sponsor the use of volunteers, and they were very successful, I think, in many ways in doing that, through the universities and through the social welfare department of many of the larger cities, like New York and Los Angeles and Dallas and Fort Worth, and in creating I think they had a role in establishing the Volunteer Week, which blossomed under President Reagan, and honored the 20 or so outstanding volunteers each week with a luncheon in the White House, each year rather, with lunch in the White House, and it gave a lot of impetus to the volunteer movement. They're well organized, and they had a very good cross-section of people on the board, but there were many people on, but a large part of the board consisted of professionals as well as volunteers. And here I felt that there was an impact or an influence on steering it more toward a professional and a volunteer course because of that.
Well, that could be. Did that have any influence, do you think? Did the volunteer centers finally rally around the national?
With some communities, the local volunteer center had a very close relationship with Volunteer, the National Center for Citizen Involvement. In Los Angeles, it was very detached.
Partly due to its executive director.
But I think in many communities they worked much closer together, and where they did, the local communities used the volunteer, the Nationals' research and contacts and staff to some degree, and especially in PR.
How are they funded now?
Well, it was a constant battle when I was on the board to raise enough money, and they did it primarily through soliciting corporations, foundations, and individuals. But for the most part, it was for corporation, foundation money, as I remember. They weren't too successful with individuals. The board was here again because a good part of the board was professional. That part of the board was just not a good fundraising part. And they tried to get people on the board who had financial clout. The best they could do would be to get the heads of some of the larger corporations which gave a certain amount of support to the National Volunteer Center.
Well, it's certainly changed, I guess, in the last couple of years with the executive director changing and then the board changing.
I think you're right, Kay. I don't know what the changes are. I haven't talked to anybody that's been on the board. I did talk briefly with Mary Ripley, and she's not very communicative. Ken Allen was an excellent executive director, and I think the agency had very major accomplishments. George Romney, who's the chairman, has been the chairman for many years, is a powerful figurehead for them and a very helpful influence in opening doors and in particularly for fundraising and support and in gaining acceptance for the agency. I think he's done an outstanding job. He's a very fine person and a great leader. After all, he ran for president of the United States, too. And he was governor of Michigan. But there are other good people on the board, but to a great extent, the board has influenced. The board decisions, the board programs reflect a good deal of the social work and, you might say, the ivory tower kind of thinking from some of the think tanks.
That can lead you into problems. What did you find was most gratifying in your role as volunteer over these years?
The fact that you could see the results. When you've had two little brothers and they've grown up, has a certain amount of problems as youngsters. Now, they weren't criminal, they weren't serious problems. When you can see both of them grown up to fine, healthy, well-adjusted manhood and citizenship, and then it's a great personal satisfaction, particularly when you retain their friendship through all these years. And a second and equally as great a satisfaction is when you can help start an agency or help build it. When I became president of Jewish Big Brothers in 1950, in the middle 50s, we've had a lot of growth, a lot of professional development since then. Going on the national board, when I did, there were 16 or 17 agencies, and I was helpful in building up national to the point where they had reached over 400 agencies.
Oh my goodness, isn't that amazing?
And I think the merger of Big Sisters with Big Brothers of America was a great step forward in the whole volunteer field. I can remember when it was first broached to the board some years before, probably in the late 60s, and the board was unanimously opposed to even thinking of or talking about it. And did a complete turnaround, although 2 or 3 board members resigned when we decided to go ahead with it. But after 3 years' study, the merger was accomplished, and it certainly, as one agency, as one national agency for programs for both boys and girls, it's become a very successful agency. And that gave me tremendous satisfaction. And a third great satisfaction was to see Big Brothers of Los Angeles get started in our living room and grown into the fine organization that it is today. And when Big Sisters, 10 years ago, Big Sisters...
I can remember when you were helping with that.
pulled out, the program pulled out of the YMCA, and the young women who were guiding the program wanted to make it an independent agency. And because of my work in the movement, I was asked to help them, which I was glad to do, and I became very enthusiastic about them because a very dedicated, committed a group of people, and went on the board, and I'm president now, and it's a great organization, and we're particularly excited now about our outreach program and our Asian American project, and working with the minority groups in Los Angeles, providing big sisters and help to their families.
Where do most of these big sisters come from, Maurice?
They're volunteers. They come through. They're referred by the churches or by word of mouth to a great extent, in some cases the schools, and then through an aggressive campaign by big sisters to get new volunteers.
Do they have the same well, I know that Big Brothers has pretty stiff criteria before
Right.
they accept somebody as a big brother. Do those same things apply to the big sisters?
Equally so, or maybe a little higher. It's very clinical, very professional.
Well, that's very important nowadays to be careful. How many big sisters do they have here in Oklahoma?
Currently have 173 matches.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Have you seen any of the programs in which you've been involved not come to fruition and fade out?
Well, on those where we have set definite goals, no, the answer would be no, because we've achieved our goals. But on some organizations, you just don't see the goals. They're not well defined. You sort of go along on programs. I think that was true. It was true on some of the United Way committees that I served on, and I think it's true to an extent with the volunteer national center. But beyond that, I think most of them have achieved their goals and what we set out to do.
Did you feel in the United Way activities that, well, you've already said that sometimes it didn't feel the goals were there clearly defined. But I've also wondered at times if, did you feel any political motivations to some of the things you were asked to do in United Way?
I didn't. I believe I was aware of to some degree that there were some political motivations, but I never experienced them. The thing that to me was most frustrating about serving in the United Way, especially in the budget review area, was that you come across such fine agencies doing such needed, valuable work, and they're so badly needed funds, the United Way can just barely make a contribution to it. They have to go through all of the bookkeeping and the presentation of their budget and time and effort, and then come back with some disappointment. And the people in United Way are equally as disappointed, the budget committees and even the staff, because you'd like to help them much more. The other area of some frustration is the fact that getting only a small part of their budget from the United Way, and yet they have to observe the closed period, and there are limitations on the way and when and how they can fundraise.
Yes, and that became I think there was one period where it was, the average support was around 23%. I mean,
That's pretty low.
yes, it sure is. And some of the new ones that they're funding are started at such a low base that
Right.
it's very hard. In the budget committees of United Way, did you feel that some of the committees' decisions were different by the time they got up the ladder of decision making?
Not really. No, I thought most of the recommendations that the committees came up with were implemented to the extent that they could be from the dollar standpoint, but I believe that the thinking, that is the recommendations, perhaps are 95% accepted. There's in a few cases that I can recall, agencies questioned or resisted the recommendations or the findings of the committee and asked for another review, and they got it. But for the most part, I think they were accepted.
Did you ever have to, in any of the committees you served on, recommend the demise of an agency?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yes.
on what grounds did the...
The one that I remember was the grounds that after repeated efforts by the United Way to have them take measures to improve the performance of the board, improve the board, improve their standards of program, they just didn't conform and just finally had sheer disappointment.
That's too bad.
Only one or two cases like that.
I always remember this, what was it, the Siemens Institute or whatever it was down in...
International Institute, wasn't it?
No, this was for sailors. And, you know, why it was in the United Way, I don't know. But they tried to put it out of business for about 10 years and finally made it, I guess. What impact as a whole do you think some of your activities have had? Now, really, your big brother leadership with the building of the number of areas involved was a tremendous impact nationally. What other things have had impact, do you think, that you've been involved with?
In the social work field?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think in each of the agencies that I've been involved with, the way they have grown and expanded and improved the professionalism and I've had a role as a board member in those cases. It hasn't been an individual thing.
Well, but you've seen the change come about
Right.
and been participating in it while it did. What significant differences, and you mentioned some a little bit, but what significant differences have you seen in the social work field itself since you've been involved?
Well, I've seen a much greater acceptance of social work by the community at large, for one thing. I think that's very notable. I think the screening of the programs, the screening of the budgets has improved a great deal. I think the presence of national organizations has had a very salutary effect on the local agencies. For example, like United Ways of America, for example, I think has exerted a good influence. Child Welfare League of America has certainly given a lot of help and a lot of improved programming to the agencies that belong to it. It's a wonderful organization, and I think that has been a great change from the early days. In other words, the performance is monitored. The agencies have to meet certain standards to belong, and that's true of the Big Brother, Little Sister agencies too, because they've had to conform to the standards of the national organization. I think there's been a big improvement in the fundraising, the techniques of fundraising, and the results of fundraising have improved vastly. Fundraising is now more of a, much more fun than it used to be. And it's much more difficult than it used to be.
Yes, indeed. It sure is.
But working with foundations that screen the agency program and have certain requirements has had a very good effect on the agencies because they have to meet these standards.
There's an interesting thing, and you more than most might be able to make some comment on it. The social responsibility of corporations came into full bloom, I think, in the 60s or early 70s.
Right.
And I always remember the book by Louis Lundberg of Bank of America.
Mm-hmm.
Forgotten what the title was. Do you think that has affected social work as a whole?
I think it has to a great extent, and I think this is one of the good results of the voluntary action centers, both locally and the national volunteers national center, because they have been instrumental in gaining corporate recognition of volunteerism in the volunteer agencies, and that's been a big factor in the loan executive program.
Mm-hmm.
Has been a wonderful help to agencies. Big Sisters just returned to Xerox, a young lady who was very helpful in our Asian American project.
Mm. Well, the some of the corporations expend tremendous sums of money, not only on direct funding, but in furnishing manpower and in-kind kind of things.
Right.
I think ARCO is the best locally.
Absolutely.
That, it seems to me, they shied away from any people in their programs that were social work trained. Do you think that will continue? Yeah?
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. They had to be internal.
You mean from people on their staff?
Mm-hmm.
Was that considered a disadvantage?
Companies have always been a little worried about social welfare. It implied
in the Big Sisters, for example, the girl who gave leadership to bringing it out of the YWCA program
came from a corporation.
Came from ARCO, and she is has been and still is a tremendous leader in Big Sisters. She became the first president. The second one was a girl who was from Cal Fed, and Cal Fed has been very
they've
supportive.
been very good.
You certainly have to recognize them, and of course, neither of these were social workers. They were internal people with those organizations. I suppose now also within ARCO, for example, there is a community department. It's headed up by the lady who's a widow of this black leader who was
Merle
prolific.
Evers. Merle Evers.
Evers. But they are not involved in the things that ARCO does, away from ARCO.
I know. It's really interesting.
So I think it is interesting.
Corporations also, you see, have started, and I don't even know what they call it, where they have counselors to help troubled employees.
Their own employees.
Yeah. Now those, they also didn't want from the school of social work.
Aren't they social workers?
No. They're called industrial counselors.
What is their background and training?
Well, USC's finally worked it out, I guess, so that it's a separate kind of thing, all entirely from the School of Social Work. But it's industrial counselors.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't make sense to me. They did say to me a couple weeks ago that some of that was being broken down.
Well, how have the results been? When an employee has problems, emotional problems.
Well, it's worked out very well in some companies.
It has?
Yeah.
Without the social worker?
Yeah, with this industrial counselor instead, who has many of the same kinds of background as the social worker does.
Well, I would say they're almost, in many ways, it's just wearing a different hat, isn't it?
Sure. That's what was so silly about it. But it was industry that refused to take a social worker. Silly.
Well, I suppose that education and training are probably similar.
Sure they
or
are.
Maybe even identical.
Maurice, do you have any personal papers, pamphlets, or anything like that you could put into the archive collection?
No, I don't. I have never written anything that was in the way of a treatise or an essay or a commentary that I...
Well, have you kept any papers, though, that might be germane?
The best thing I could give to you, you probably already have it, is the book that was produced by Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America on the history of the Big Brother movement.
That would be helpful. Do you also have any pictures or articles from your past that you have collected? Marge said that she'd given a lot of things to the archives when you moved.
She did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have anything from the past. There's a recent picture, the issue of LA Match on Big Sisters of me, and which you're welcome to have. But
you might tell
I have
them.
a couple of photographs taken with. I have one taken with some of the past presidents of the Jewish Big Brothers.
Well, that'd be good.
And I have one photograph taken when I was president up at Camp Max Strauss's on the wall. Things like that you could have.
Okay. All right, that's good. And will you give them to Marge to get to the library? She'll be happy to get them, I think. Okay.
There's one that I think I can pick up for you now. I think it's fairly handy. And when we're finished, I'll check it.
Okay, good. Well, I think we are about done, Maurice. Do you think of anything you'd like to add, though, before we finish this? Any personal comments you'd like to make?
Well, I'd just like to mention one other volunteer activity I was in for some years, which is very interesting. I was on the board of the Jewish Federation Council at the time they merged with the...
That's important.
That was very interesting, and it was sectarian and went through many of the same problems United Way has in their from a fundraising point of view and from an allocation point of view. And it's interesting to compare the two because they, like United Way, give only partial support to most of the agencies that are in their umbrella. But one or two favorite agencies there, and I would say that there's perhaps more political pressure in that organization there as United Way. But also I would say that among their agencies there's a very high degree of professionalism.
Yes, I agree with that totally.
Right.
In fact, that was, I always remember my first brush with Maurice Schwarz. I'll turn this off after a minute here, but the Jewish agencies in the field of aging, for instance, were the first to develop professional people to deal with the aging.
That's interesting.
It is, and it was important because they did it before the population of aging got so huge, and the demands for it had become so huge.
Mm-hmm.
That was very obvious from the very beginning. Well, Maurice, anything else?
So I think okay at the moment.
Okay. Well, I appreciate this very much, and thank you.
Good luck.